Hello and welcome to Live with Abouna on CYC. If you're just tuning in, don't forget to send in your questions to 0416 551 292. Write to us on Twitter at CYC Now or write to us on Facebook at Christian Youth Channel. Today we're blessed to have Abouna Antonios with us. Welcome, Abouna.
Hi Miriam, nice to be here.
Thanks for coming. And also to our audience, thanks for tuning in on the night of Origin. We know that's a bit of a sacrifice, but we'll keep you updated with scores and hopefully there'll be something to gain here as well. We'll start with our first question. Abouna, they've asked, is it better to learn Coptic as a language rather than changing the Coptic in the liturgy to English?
Well, I think that Coptic is our history and our heritage. So it is a beautiful language and it does carry a lot of beauty in the hymns, and also, as I'm sure you're aware, you can't ever really completely translate the full meaning of things from one language to another. So there are a lot of benefits in preserving our Coptic language. But at the same time, I think we'd also have to say the most important thing in our church services is that people be engaged and involved in the prayers. And of course, if you're using a language that you don't understand, it makes it that much harder. But you know, St. Paul said, I'd rather speak 5 words with understanding than 10,000 words without understanding. So while it would be ideal if we could teach every Coptic person to speak Coptic and, you know, preserve the heritage, I think we have to be a little bit practical and pragmatic and maybe just introduce it in small doses here and there so it doesn't die out completely.
And wouldn't it make it a little bit difficult to bring in friends, for example, from uni or school or work if all we spoke was Coptic?
For sure. I think if all we spoke was Coptic, that would make it very difficult. And I think I have Greek friends who have that problem in the Greek church in Australia, at least. They've been very slow to introduce English into their services. However, I've also had Western people coming into the Coptic church and sometimes saying they actually preferred hearing the Coptic prayers because it just sounded special and sacramental, even if they didn't understand the words. That's, you know, fine if you're just coming for one visit and it's something that's unusual for you. But if you want to seriously think about joining the church, then I think it's really important that you understand what you're saying.
Engaged in in the practice. And the next question is, in our liturgies there is a trend for the deacons to sing hymns and responses in English. Is it true that it is necessary because our Coptic church needs to evangelise and reach out?
That's a very related sort of issue. Look, I think the first language definitely should be English. There's no doubt about it. And I'm old enough to remember the struggle over English in our churches in Australia. Some of the younger viewers, and probably yourself, probably didn't actually live through this at all. But when English was first introduced 30 odd years ago, 40 odd years ago now, there were a lot of people who were very upset and thought that this wasn't proper church if you weren't praying in Arabic and Coptic. But of course we've found over time the importance. One of the things that people from other churches often say about the Coptic church is that the youth are much more engaged in the church than in most of the other churches. And I think one of the reasons for that has been that they felt the church cares about them and cares enough to use their language in the church. And I think that is very, very important. And as I say, I think if we are interested in evangelism, certainly that's an important issue to keep in mind. I think we are probably going to have to think in the future of having parishes that are specifically dedicated to expressing the Orthodox faith of the Coptic tradition in a Western sort of way. And that would obviously include the language. As much as I love the Coptic language, and I totally enjoy the Coptic Mass when I pray it more than I do the English or Arabic Masses, nonetheless, we have to understand that that's just a language in the end, and that we have to use the language that works for people. And if I'm an Australian person or an American or a British person who wants to be Orthodox, that doesn't necessarily mean I also want to be Egyptian. I should be able to take the true ancient Orthodox faith, the apostolic faith, and express it in my own culture, in my own way. And of course, language is a very important thing there. So I think if we want to be serious about evangelism and for people who come into the church to be comfortable in the church, there are things we must insist on. our dogma, our faith, our beliefs, and there are things that we have to be willing to let go, which would be things like language.
And what other changes would you think would be put in place in a more Western Coptic church?
Look, this is a fascinating topic and one that I think we will be discussing for many years to come. I have heard of some mission parishes that have been opened up in America and in Canada, and I believe we have one in Melbourne as well. And they're struggling with these issues. People I talk to who are involved in those services are struggling with things. So I know, for example, of one parish in America where the men and the women don't sit on separate sides of the church. Now, I don't know how the viewers would think about that, because it's something that we are just so used to doing in our Coptic churches. But it's not actually in the Bible, and it's not actually written down as far as I know.
I've definitely been to other churches where everyone kind of sits together.
Yeah.
And maybe that eliminates the whole idea that, you know, perhaps that maybe things are a bit more sexual or whatever, or you're looking at somebody in the wrong way. Maybe it encourages fellowship, because you're all just one. You're not just female or just male on either side of the church. And
the families get to sit together. Fathers with their daughters, mothers with their sons, husbands and wives get to share the Mass together, which is obviously a lovely thing. Of course, there is the other argument, you know, on the other side, which says that it's a good way to focus and not be distracted and all that sort of stuff. And you can kind of see the sense in both. But I think the important point is that that's not really part of our core faith. I think one of the good ways to kind of work out what is core to being an Orthodox Christian is often to do a little survey of other Orthodox churches who share our faith. And you will find that there are a number of other Orthodox churches who do have men and women sitting together in the Mass. And there are some who do it the way that we do it as well, which kind of tells you that it's not a, you know, we're not going to go to hell if we all sit together in the Mass. And that therefore leads us to ask, well, what's going to help the people who attend to get closer to God? And that comes back, I think, to the culture of the people who attend. Now, we of Egyptian culture, we've been used to that. It probably does help us, and we might find it a distraction if we changed all of a sudden. But if you are from a Western culture, that's very alien to you. It's very foreign. And it's probably more distracting that you have to do it, and actually takes away from the enjoyment of the Mass.
And I guess that's the difference between culture and religion, and that's what we slowly weed out.
And that's always a difficult thing to sort of work out, and different people in the church will have different opinions about what belongs in the do not touch box and what belongs in, you know, you can change this kind of box. As I was saying earlier, you know, a couple of decades ago, people thought language was in the do not touch box. But we've changed that, and I don't think we've suffered in any way in having done that. I think we've benefited.
Okay, let's move on. Next question is, I heard that we are still married in heaven. If this is the case, are we then not supposed to remarry if our spouse passes away?
Ooh, okay. I don't know where we've heard that we're still married in heaven, because the only verse I can think of in the Bible that addresses that is when Jesus was asked about what if a fellow died and his wife married his brother, and he died and married his brother again, and so on. To whom would she be married? And he said, you don't understand what you're talking about, because in heaven they're more like angels. They neither marry nor are given in marriage. So marriage, I think, is a sacrament that we have here on earth that helps us to understand what sacrificial, self-giving love really means. In a way, you're kind of practicing with a human being in order that you can then practice that kind of love with God, who loves us in the same way. So, will my wife be my wife in heaven? I think she still will be my wife, in the sense that it won't be like I will suddenly forget that she was my wife and not know who she is.
Do you have a memory, though, in heaven? Or is it only just to praise God?
That's a very good question. I don't know.
Because it's kind of a very human way to look at it, but
it is.
I don't know, does the soul or spirit remember, or does it just connect?
I think we will remember. I mean, I think we pray for those who have passed away, and we ask for their prayers for us. So clearly that relationship of love is preserved in some way. How it's preserved is, I don't know, and I think there's a lot of things about heaven that we just have to admit we don't know, and that's, and we call it a mystery, and I think that's being honest.
Yeah.
So really we can only speculate in the end. But yeah, I think, my wife will be someone very special to me, and I think heaven will be a much nicer place if God allows me to be there, because I will be able to not only enjoy it and enjoy the presence of God directly, but also to share that joy with my wife and to enjoy it through her eyes because of that special bond that we had on earth. But I think the purposes of marriage that we have in this life are not really valid anymore when you get to heaven. So you're not going to be, producing a new family and raising them and going through struggles together and all of those things that you do in a marriage here on earth.
Yeah.
But we certainly, I think, do believe that the bonds of love that we forge here in this life are not taken away when we enter into the next life.
So then, just to answer the question, marry or remarry or stay single once your spouse passes away?
I don't think we need to be married in heaven. I think on earth we need marriage because it's one of the sacraments that helps to save us. It helps to transform who I am.
Yeah.
Because by being married and eventually by having children, I have to learn to love and to give, and that changes who I am.
Yeah.
If I'm in heaven, I think I'm already who I need to be. So I don't need those kinds of sacraments to change me. Just as I don't suppose we'll be having masses and, Holy Communion as flesh and blood in heaven, because that's the way that we are united with Christ here on the earth. But in heaven, it'll be a much more direct, again, who knows what it's going to be like and how it's going to work.
Yeah.
But we won't need something to mediate that unity between us and Christ. We will just be directly one.
I'm just thinking, just because you've said that it's likely you'll still recognise each other to some degree. So if you have remarried, does that mean you recognise two women or two men?
Oh, I suppose that's quite possible. It is interesting, if you look up the rite for a second or subsequent marriage in our church, it's a much shorter service than the normal wedding ceremony. And between you and me, there seems to be an awful lot of apology involved in it, in the prayers.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of reflects, I think there has been a certain strain of thought in Orthodox Christian history that says that second marriage for any purpose is not a good idea. And some people have even said it should never happen. Even if you're just a widow or a widower, you still should not marry anybody else. And I suppose that grows out of the idea that in being married to someone, you become one with them. And having been one, even if that bond is broken, say by death, that one should not again, marry after that and be united to someone else. But then there have been fathers and teachers in the church who have said that we live in a broken and fallen world, and people have needs, and they're very real needs.
That's it. There are extenuating circumstances to take. Should someone be widowed at 20, were they expected to be alone for the rest of their lives? It's a bit unfair.
And I think most people would say that wouldn't be a fair thing to expect. And as I say, I think once we get to heaven, I don't think it'll be one of those issues that's really big on our minds. We won't be too worried about it. And I'm sure there'll be some kind of solution up there. I think in heaven, you love everybody anyway. And yes, you have a particular kind of bond with every different person you love. Like there are differences in the way that you love different people. I'd imagine if you had two wives, you would love each in a different way. But in heaven, that would be something that would be perfected and sanctified.
Okay, and let's keep chatting about what heaven is. The next question is, what is your opinion on what heaven and hell are?
Oh, okay. There's a really simple answer, which is, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I can elaborate a little bit if you like that.
Please do.
But it's important to say that at the beginning, because I don't feel comfortable sometimes when I read or hear things where people are really confident and say, this is exactly what heaven is going to be like. And, I've measured the distance between the seats, and, things like that. But what will it be like? Well, basically, I think heaven is more a state of being rather than a place. It's a way of existing, I suppose. And it's the way of existing in which we, the creation, have been plugged in to our Creator once again in the way that we were always meant to be. So I use plugged in as a modern metaphor, but the biblical language is to be made one with God. As Jesus said, when he was praying to his Father, and he said, you in me, the Father in me, Christ, as they will be in me and I will be in them. So it's a kind of, the human being is drawn into the circle of love that exists between the Holy Trinity, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, which is the eternal essence of God and of who God is. And then we, the creation, have this wonderful privilege and honour of being invited into that eternal circle of divine love. And that's why I think also Jesus said that the kingdom of God is within you, to people who are alive now here on earth. Again, I think many of the fathers spoke that, or told us that the kingdom of heaven isn't just something that's in the future, it's something that begins here and now, in this life, in this world. Every time we have a Mass, we kind of reclaim a little bit of this fallen and broken world and make it the territory of the kingdom of heaven, like an embassy. You know how the Australian embassy in America is actually considered to be part of Australian territory. It's not American territory, it's Australian territory. Well, that's what we do every time we have a Mass. We claim that little bit of the world for the kingdom of heaven. And the more that I'm united with Christ, say through the sacraments, through acts of love and giving and so on, the more my heart becomes a part of the kingdom of heaven. I think that we shouldn't just think of heaven as being something that is going to happen in the future and wonder what will it be like. If you really want to know what heaven is like, follow Christ now, here in this world, and give your heart to Christ and let him rule your heart and be like Christ as far as you can. And you'll get a taste of what heaven is like.
Okay, so if heaven is a state of being, as you've said, then on the flip side, what is hell?
I think it's a state of being as well, but a very different kind of being. So if heaven is to be drawn into the love of the Trinity, hell is to reject the love of the Trinity and to insist on making yourself your own autonomous ruler. I am the boss. Nobody's going to be boss of me, not even God. And certainly no human beings. I'm my own boss. And that's a kind of a dead end. You hem yourself in to this tiny little narrow world of selfishness.
Yes and no, just because in this world it's very, we're taught to be pretty self-seeking. And we're taught that, this me culture is the only way to be. So how would you deter someone from going down that path if you're saying hell is just a world that is all about you? How would you make that less appealing?
Okay, so you're saying that in this world it looks really appealing, look after yourself and it looks like you have a better life. I would say if you really think deeply about it, you realise that it actually doesn't work. The beauty of Christianity is, although it sounds weird, it actually does work. And it kind of goes against what you would initially think. So you would think that by being greedy and acquiring, getting more things for yourself, you would have a happier life. But if you look at actual studies that look at how happy people are, it's not wealth that makes people happy. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a new trend in psychology that started in America by a chap called Martin Seligman, I think. He was a psychologist who started to ask, psychologists look at things that go wrong in human thinking and behaviour. We never look at what goes right. So he started this trend of looking at what makes people happy, what makes people have a good life. And a lot of studies have been conducted, and overall, by and large, the top two things that make people happy, guess what they are?
Charity and belonging to something bigger than you.
Excellent. Yes, you obviously are aware of all of this. Yes. That's exactly right. See, it's not getting money, and it's not getting a big house, and it's not getting a big job or becoming prime minister or president or whatever. It's none of those things. It's belonging to something bigger than yourself, and it's giving of yourself to others. And if you go back to what Jesus said when he was asked what's the most important of the commandments, and he said, what do you think? And the guy replied, well, I think love the Lord your God with all your mind and heart and soul and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. And that's exactly what those two things are: belonging to something bigger than yourself, loving God, and loving your neighbour by giving of your time to volunteer and give to charity and all that sort of stuff. And they are unselfish things. So the fact is, we are built, whether we like it or not, we are built to be happy when we lose ourselves, when we give of ourselves. When we do the opposite of that, in the end, we may get temporary happiness initially, but in the end you end up with a life without meaning, that's unfulfilled and unsatisfying. And the high suicide rates in Western countries, much higher than in less developed countries, I think are a good indication. The very high divorce rates are a good indication. People who are selfish are not necessarily happier. In fact, they're a lot less happy.
But just to clarify, not everyone that gets divorced does it for selfish reasons.
No,
So
of course, yes. No, I'm not saying that at all.
Right,
No, I'm talking about an overall sort of big picture thing, which is certainly that, over time in history, as people have become, as the importance of individuals looking after themselves has become more important, other trends in society have also increased. But of course, there are always individual differences, definitely. But to come back to the question, I think that's, for me, how Christianity explains hell. That's really the core of what hell is. It's choosing to be selfish, and then the consequence of that, the inevitable consequence, is that you suffer horribly because that's not what you were made to be like.
Good answer. We're going to do something unselfish and go to a break right now so you can have a look at the state of origin for now. A reminder to send in your questions to 0416 551 292. Write to us on Twitter at CYC Now, or write to us on Facebook at Christian Youth Channel. We'll be back soon.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Welcome back to Live with Abouna on CYC. We encourage you to send in your questions to 0416 551 292. Write to us on Twitter at CYC Now, or write to us on Facebook at Christian Youth Channel. The score at the moment for the State of Origin is 0-0, so there's no reason for you not to be watching us instead. We're joined by Abouna Antonios, and we're going to go straight into the next question, Abouna. It says, how can we as youth prepare ourselves from the educated and witty atheists?
Oh, okay. This is one of my pet topics. Okay, I think a lot of people worry that if they thought too much about their faith, that they might end up losing it. What I would like to say to people is, don't have that worry and don't be anxious about that. I often say in my discussions on this topic that if our faith is true, then we should be able to throw anything at all at it and it will still stand because it's the truth. And if it's not true, we should still throw everything we can at it because I'd rather know that what I believe is false, and let's not waste my time following it. So as you know, I've been involved in a service called Apologetics, where we debate with atheists and stuff like that for a long time. And over all the years, I have become more and more convinced that our faith really is true. I'm probably more convinced today than I was before I got interested in the subject and started looking at the kinds of things atheists throw at our Christian faith.
Give us an example.
Okay. So atheism today loves to talk about how science has shown us the world is not the world of Christianity. So Christianity's world is a world in which there is a God who fiddles with things all the time and intervenes and even came and joined us here on the earth and so on. And that's not true, because the things we used to think were miracles we now know are things that are just natural phenomena. Science has gotten rid of the need for God. Now that sounds like a really strong argument, particularly if you're involved in the sciences. And I know many of our youth are. They are working in areas of science and have to study a whole lot of stuff. Okay. When you think about it though, science is actually a very limited tool. It's not a tool that can tell you everything about everything. Science is specifically designed just to tell you how the physical world works. And that's all it can do. So all it can tell you is how something works. It can't tell you things like, why is this thing the way that it is? Why does it exist at all? And the big question, I think, the biggest problem for an atheist is this one simple question. Why is there anything at all? Why does anything exist? Or it's often phrased as, why is there something rather than nothing? Mm-hmm. Now, you can't answer that question with science. The best effort I've ever seen was by a guy called Lawrence Krauss, who was here in Australia a year or two ago. And his answer is that if you look in the emptiness of space, every now and then a little particle of matter and another particle of antimatter pop out of the vacuum, and usually they just hit each other and disappear again. And that shows you how something can come out of nothing, and it's just a natural phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Well, what's wrong with that argument? Well, number one, the vacuum of empty space is not nothing. Yeah. There is space there. Mm-hmm. There is time there. There are laws of nature that govern how these particles behave. Where did they all come from? They didn't just pop out of empty space. Mm-hmm. Okay, if something doesn't exist, it can't create itself. If you just think about that sentence, something that doesn't exist doesn't have the ability to do anything, mm-hmm. Yeah. Much less create itself. So the only way you can solve that problem is by saying there must be something that doesn't have to be brought into existence. Something that is, by its own nature, existence. And that's what we call God. Mm-hmm. Now, that is, whenever I put that to atheists, and I put it to a lot of atheists over the years, they cannot find an answer to that. Yeah. And in fact, it seems to me like a watertight thing.
But then what if someone was to ask, well, then where did God come from?
Okay, now remember what we just said. The nature of God has to be that he himself does not have a beginning. Mm-hmm. So time had to come from somewhere. If you want to ask that question, where did God come from, that suggests that there was a time when God did not exist, mm-hmm. and then he started to exist, and then there's a time after when he does exist. Yep. But you can't say that about God because he's the one who created time mm-hmm. itself. Okay, so unless you're going to say that the universe is infinite, like it has no beginning, and science has told us that that's not true, because if the Big Bang Theory is correct, then the universe had a definite beginning. Mm-hmm. Well, if science tells us that it's not infinite, then the only other option is there must be an uncaused first cause, something that is itself not able to that doesn't need to come into existence. It is existence itself. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing I love about Orthodox Christianity, because in the West they have a bit of a problem, they try to pin down exactly what God is. Mm-hmm. In the East, we've always said, we don't know what God is. He is a mystery, and we're not even going to try. If you can imagine a cockroach trying to understand Albert Einstein's theories of relativity, mm-hmm. okay? That difference between the cockroach and Albert Einstein is much smaller than the difference between us and God, if God is who we think he is. Mm-hmm. So how could an uncaused cause exist? We can honestly say, we don't know. That's a mystery. And we would be surprised if we did know. You know, if we could understand God, he wouldn't be God. But what we do know...
that's part of being faithful. Having faith means, accepting the unknown sometimes.
It is, exactly. Yeah. But again, I'm glad you used that phrase because often atheists think that to be faithful means to give up on reason and thinking. Our faith is not a faith without reasons. It's a faith built on reasons. Faith is what you do when you get to the limit of where reason can take you. Mm-hmm. When thinking about it and logically, and you hit a boundary and you see that there's no way beyond that boundary, well then you use your reasons that you've got so far to kind of give you an insight into what's beyond the boundary. Mm. And that's all what we can do. We know God has to exist, but we can't pin down exactly what God is or what he's like. Mm-hmm. And nobody can. So that's a really, I've never met an atheist who can give me a sensible or reasonable answer to that. There's just no satisfying answer to that.
That's a good example. Let's move on. This question was posted on your Facebook page. So the question is, Father, can you please tell me about the Coptic people in Egypt? Those I have met impress me with their humility and acceptance of their unfair treatment. Are they all like that or more of a mixed bag?
Okay, should I give an honest answer?
Give an honest answer.
Yes, of course. Look, in any community, you will always have a wide variety of personalities and attitudes and approaches. So, yes, I think for us to say that every Coptic person is an angelic martyr would not be true. Let's be honest about it. However, I think it is very fair to say that as a community and as a faith community, certainly in the last few years, with all the turmoil that's happened in Egypt, I've been very proud of how the Coptic people have conducted themselves. I think all of us have been. I loved hearing what our Pope said when our churches were burnt down. I can't remember how long ago it was. I think it was just after President Morsi was deposed. And people went on a rampage. Muslim fanatics went on a rampage in Egypt, and about 80 churches were burnt down. Now, any sort of normal person would have been completely upset. How dare they do this to us? You know, we haven't done anything to them, etc. Here's what Pope Tawadros said. He said, do you know what? If the cost of peace and justice in Egypt is 80 Coptic churches, then we are happy to pay that price. Because what we care about is the people who live in Egypt, not just the Christian, the Muslim and the Christian. We want everybody to be treated fairly. We want everybody to have the opportunity to flourish and to grow, not just the Christians. Now that to me is a really good Christian attitude to take, and especially, it's not just words, it's not just theory, it's in practice. And I think that he won a lot of respect around the world with that approach. And I think he was supported in what he said by the vast majority of Egyptian people. Look, Egypt could very easily have turned into a Lebanon of the 70s or a Syria of today. But the Christians have constantly refused to use any force. Some may say that's because we're a minority and we just get annihilated if we tried. But look, in other countries, minorities have taken to terrorism, suicide bombings, etc. The Copts in Egypt have never done that. They've always said, we want peaceful solutions. We don't want to, harm our enemy. We want to win our enemy with love.
That's great. The next question is, Father, in Matthew where it says, whatever we ask for in faith, believing, we shall receive it. Can we assume that means anything at all, even if it is impossible by human logic?
No. Here's a really simple example. Tonight there's this really important football game going on. New South Wales versus Queensland. New South Wales has lost the series for the last 8 years running. Okay. If I today prayed for New South Wales to win, and if my friend Father David up in Brisbane in Queensland prayed for Queensland to win today, shouldn't God grant both our prayers? And you can't say, well, he could just make it a draw, because then neither of our prayers would be answered. Because I want to win.
I'm getting word that Father David's prayer is being answered. The score's 2-0 at the moment.
It's lots of time to go.
In Queensland's favour, yeah.
Well, there's still a long time to go. So I think that to read the Bible in that kind of very literal way and out of context way is not right, and it will lead to a lot of problems. And again, this is one of the beautiful things about Eastern and particularly Orthodox theology, is that we're very careful not to take verses out of context and just take them as they are, but consider them in the context of what the whole message of the Bible is. Now, what is the whole message of the Bible? The message of the Bible is not, this is a religion where if you follow God, you get everything that you want. There are Christians who interpret the Bible that way. They call it the health and wealth gospel, the prosperity gospel. Basically, if you follow Christ and if you do all the things he asks of you, then you can be assured 100% you'll be rewarded with money and power and all the things that you want, whatever your heart desires. Christianity actually says the opposite. Christ said, if you want to follow me, you have to sell everything that you have. You have to be willing to die like a seed falling into the ground and dying. It's only in dying, it's only in losing that you can truly live and you can truly win. So Christianity is about giving up the things that I want in order to become, as we were saying before, the image of God, the image of Christ, which is giving love, self-giving, self-sacrificing love. And if that's the case, how in the world could that verse mean, if you want your football team to win, then just pray about it and God will make them win? That just doesn't fit with the gospel as we understand it. So what does it mean then? What it means, I think, is that when you follow God, your will becomes like the will of God more and more. So the more that I sacrifice myself, the more that my will is transformed and changed and sanctified and becomes more and more a good fit with the will of God. And what we can say for sure is that ultimately the will of God is going to be done. There's no way that it's going to be frustrated or defeated. Sometimes it looks like it isn't being fulfilled, but in the end it always is. Christ came to love us and to teach us to love back, and he ended up being crucified. It looks like the will of God is not being fulfilled. But after the crucifixion comes the resurrection, in which he overcomes death and gives life to the whole world. And through that gift of life to the whole world, he wins people to become like him and so on. So whatever you ask in my name, it will be given to you. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, and so on. I think that's how it has to be understood, that the more my will becomes like the will of God, the more I will find that the things I will, which are the things that God wills, are the things that will happen. I think also we could say one other thing about it too, which is that God often does give to people the things that they really, really want. And even if they are things that are not that good for them. But sometimes, if somebody really wants to be evil, God doesn't stop them. He says, are you sure this is what you want? Yes, Lord, this is exactly what I want. And he steps back and he says, okay, go ahead. I'll let you do what you want. I'm not going to frustrate your will. Because he doesn't force us. That's not what love is about. Love is about changing us, not forcing us. And in that sense, I think people do get what they seek and they do get what they want. And in that sense, I think you could understand that verse as well.
But maybe it's also about us not asking for things that are impractical or a bit too far-fetched as well, because he's respecting our will, we should respect his.
Yeah, and I think also it makes you ask yourself, what am I asking for? And is that a good thing to ask for?
Is it godly? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes we are just asking selfishly. And let's be frank, if God gave us everything we ever asked for, I wouldn't want that to happen. There have been times when I've wanted horrible things.
Yeah.
Okay,
And you only learn that in hindsight, yeah.
A little confession just between you and me and whoever's watching. I remember being a child and, wishing that, someone who treated me badly would die, for example, because I was a little child and that's all I knew.
Yeah, you don't know.
Imagine if God answered that prayer. Okay, I'd be horrified
That's
now
on
to
you
think
to
that God would
carry
answer that
forever,
prayer.
yeah,
So
yeah.
thank God that he doesn't answer every prayer that we ask.
Okay, next question. What was the state the righteous people of the Old Testament who passed away and went to Hades, awaiting the coming of the Messiah?
What was their state when they died? Okay, look, in the Old Testament, I'm not an Old Testament expert, so my knowledge is fairly limited. But in the Old Testament, as I understand it, they had a view of the life after death as being a kind of almost a shadowy state of near non-existence. And a lot of the verses that you read in the Old Testament, particularly in the Psalms, give you that feeling that when a person dies, it's almost like they're asleep or that they don't exist anymore. So, how does it go? Those who are in the grave do not offer praise. I think I've got that wrong, but and stuff like that. That was the state basically of the human being who's been cut off from God. And therefore in a state of, not having the light of God, not having that force of existence that comes from God, not being able to enjoy it. So therefore they're in a kind of a minimally existing kind of state. And I think when Christ died, as a normal human being, just like you and me, he underwent the same process. And his spirit went into that state of minimal existence. But of course he wasn't just like you and me, because he's also the divine God as well. And therefore he was the one who was able to release humanity from that state and open the doors of existence with God and unity with God once more. So I think one of the fathers kind of described it as something like a monster or a dragon who swallows the hero, but then the hero kind of makes the dragon explode from the inside of his belly and sets everyone who was in there free once again. And that's kind of like what Christ did for us, and that's what we now experience as Christians when we die. We're no longer in the belly of the dragon.
Last question, a lot lighter.
Oh, okay.
And all about football fever. Who do you think will win the FIFA World Cup, and what will be the score tomorrow against the Netherlands?
Ooh, I can tell you what I'd like it to be. Well, I understand Australia hasn't lost to the Netherlands in the last 3 games that they've played. Apparently they won once and drew twice. But then the Netherlands apparently did very well against the last World Cup champions, Spain. So who knows what will happen. As much as I would like it to be otherwise, I don't see Australia winning, unfortunately.
And now we can't pray about it.
Well, you can pray if you like. Yes. But yes, who will win altogether? It's very hard to tell. I left my crystal ball at home. Don't tell anyone that I have one. I did see one lady who actually went through a whole lot of statistics about who's won World Cups in the past and predicted that Chile would be the one that would win. And if Australia can't win the World Cup, may I say, my next team that I'd be barracking for is Chile, because we have a lovely young lady in our parish who is originally Chilean. And I would love to see her rejoicing that her country of origin won the World Cup. If it can't be Australia, it can't be Egypt, I'd go for Chile.
Done. As far as I know, the score at the State of Origin has not changed. It's still 2-0 in favour of the Maroons. Queensland, I don't know.
You're obviously a great fan.
Yeah, huge football fan. We're going to let you get back to that game, so it wasn't too much of a sacrifice to watch us today. And send in your questions to 0416 551 292 for us to get answers to next week. Thank you again, Abouna, for joining us.
Thanks, Miriam. It's been a pleasure.
And enjoy your night.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Hello, CYC kids. Here is a new show coming for you.
When we read this verse, what comes to mind?
Many stories from the Bible, from our church.
Monk said, go read your Bible for 1 year, from beginning to end, and then come back.
And many other interesting stories. Tutti will tell them to you.